I could be recording. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. And today we are welcoming our, have been for a while when we hosted a J1 International Exchange Visitor at SoCal campuses. So we are really excited today to welcome Drasko. Drasko, let me know if I pronounce your last name wrong, not correctly. Is that Dravic?
It's Jurovic.
Jurovic. Oh, sorry.
It's difficult to pronounce it, I know. Don't worry
Sorry
about
that. Just quickly introduce, I will introduce Dr. Bacon and let Dr. Bacon introduce Drasko to the community. So for those of you who know Dr. Bacon is a professor in the marriage, couples, and the family therapy program at TSSPP SoCal campuses. But for to know more about Dr. Bacon, this is the way like I got to know Dr. Bacon as well. 6 years in a row, Dr. Bacon has been the faculty lead of study abroad to Switzerland. With the focus of with the focus of spirituality and addiction. Yeah. It has been one of our very popular programs in TSSPP, and students have had life-changing and impactful experience in the international context, mainly learning the spiritual component of addiction and the treatment, as well as its integration into the foundations of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step model. So now I will pass on, without further ado, I will pass on the virtual microphone to Dr. Bacon so she can introduce our international exchange visitor, Drasko Jurovic, right? Hopefully this time is correct. Yes. Go ahead, Dr. Bacon. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you for joining us. This has been a couple of years in the making because he was supposed to come before the whole COVID experience happened. So we've all persevered, and thanks to Cindy for helping make this happen. Because I think this is something unique for the Chicago School in many ways, and really adds to the benefits of coming to our institution. So Drasko and I met on the study abroad trips. So he's very familiar with our program, but in our conversations found out he has an expertise in Brexit and many other things we're interested in. He's coming to us from Paris School of Business in Paris, France, where he's an instructor there at the Paris School of Business, and he holds a master's degree in public law from University of Belgrade and a master's degree in European comparative law from Sorbonne University in Paris, and has worked as an associate in a law firm and was hired by the Official Journal to analyze jurisprudence of the Serbian highest court and European Court of Human Rights. So he also is an educator, and he's going to be presenting to us today, and we're looking forward to hearing all about Brexit post COVID-19.
Okay.
So we will switch.
Great.
There we go.
Okay, thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you very much, Dr. Bacon. And it's a great pleasure to be in California today. We had to postpone it several times, but finally I'm here and I'm looking forward to this presentation. So let's start immediately because we have a busy schedule. There are so many things that I would like to share with you today. And so let's go immediately. Today's topic is the EU post-COVID-19. And as you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has generally considered to accelerated negative trends. And only time will tell if it could be different for the European Union. However, a brief description of European identity, then competencies of the EU in the domain of public health, the EU's consolidated response to the pandemic after a very shaky start, and the impact of the pandemic and Brexit could help us to understand if the EU could become stronger and out stronger of this pandemic. So you all know that COVID-19 infected countries and societies with a sense of insecurity, fear, fragmentation, and isolation. all around the globe. Pandemic has added uncertainty to uncertainty, fear upon fear, and emphasized an anxiety about the complex world around us that has been moving too fast. Nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, the European identity is founded on several characteristics that might be missing in some parts of the United States, where car culture, suburban sprawl, and great open spaces dominate the landscape. And I see that through the window of Dr. Bacon's office. Europe, by contrast, is voked and vocable. Distances are on human scale. Its pedestrian culture is based on squares and small streets, usually named after scholars or statements, famous for their discoveries or massacres. Life is lived on intimate scale in Europe. In Europe, with its history of enlightenment, we meet, read, write, and plot in overcrowded coffee houses. We bump shoulders on the street and in public transportation. We greet friends with 2 kisses on cheeks in France, la bise. So the overall impact of lockdown measures, very strict lockdown measures, and social distancing, later renamed in physical distancing. I see that here on campus we still have signs for social distancing. So that impact has been even more devastating in France than probably has been in the States. And I would like to emphasize that the same applies to the war rhetoric used at the beginning of the pandemic. So if the COVID-19 indeed follows the logic of the war, who is the enemy? The enemy, or at least its host or ally, could be the person standing behind you, standing close to you, Dr. Bacon at this moment. And the welcoming kiss is suddenly dangerous as hug of condolence or happiness. And barriers were quickly erected to protect us from our friends, family members, neighbors, and fellow Europeans. So to fight against a virus that respects no borders, modern Europe without borders was building them everywhere. National borders, they were re-established in panic. And a coordinated response at European level have been expected to contain the spread of the disease. Instead, each and every country pursued its national strategy, which included border closures. It led to de facto suspension of Schengen area because in March 2020, 18 out of 26 Schengen states reimposed border controls or completely closed their borders. Even when free movement of people was re-established in summer 2020 or in 2021, reinstated passport controls meant corridors of major European airports filled with endless queues of travelers. And far from preventing the spread of this disease, those passport checks, they made physical distancing impossible, and they only increased the risk of contagion. For countries like United States of America, China, Russia, retreating with national borders is not unexpected. That is the first response. But the free movement of people is a fundamental pillar of European identity. Its even temporary suspension is viewed as a symbol of lack of solidarity and the symbol that the whole European joint venture is in danger. European Union is extraordinary continuing experiment in shared sovereignty, borderless trade, freedom of movement. And some even wondered if the EU could shatter under the pressure of COVID-19 crisis. No doubt that European Union was overwhelmed at the beginning of the crisis, at the beginning of the pandemic. But let's be clear, most states were overwhelmed. Border controls were quickly reestablished. There was a profound lack of solidarity among European countries. There were restrictions imposed on the export of personal protective equipment. And it is worth of noticing then when Italy, the hardest hit country, EU member state, in the early months of the pandemic, sought assistance. It took its European partners longer to respond and to provide support than it did for China, Russia, Cuba, or Albania. Many EU member states, especially those first and the hardest hit by the pandemic, felt fragile and alone in this crisis. And in the short term, there was a lack of masks, there was a lack of respirators, but there was even bigger problem. There was a sense that tough austerity measures imposed by the EU during past decades stripped their health system from the necessary resources to respond to pandemic. And regardless of whether this is true or not, such perception undermined European solidarity and casted a long-term shadow on European capabilities to build security and defense capabilities. If EU member states cannot rely on each other during the pandemic to fight a virus, how they can do so in fighting an aggressive external power? I will not give an example that is in our minds at this moment. And there was much less talk about staggering 700 billion euro fiscal stimulus for the European economy announced by European Central Bank in March 2020 than about Russian or Chinese aid to Italy. Such a huge envelope used to buy government and corporate bonds saved countless jobs in Southern European countries that were struggled economically even before the COVID-19. However, it is much harder to photograph 700 billion euros than Russian military virologists, Chinese cargo planes on Italian runways. It almost seemed like Russian military trucks on Italian roads and Chinese planes galvanized more the EU than images of desperate Italian doctors and nurses. But despite that undeniable lack of coordination and solidarity between EU member states at the beginning of the crisis, there were so many examples of solidarity, resilience, and creativity of European society. Community response was strong and widespread. Spanish people did grocery shopping for their elderly neighbors. Dressmakers working in German theaters supplied protective face masks that were lacking in many hospitals or in Europe. Polish restaurants, they prepared meals for healthcare workers. Belgium landlords, they offered accommodation to doctors and nurses who wanted to stay away from their families to protect them from the virus. Then vacuum cleaner manufacturers in the UK, they supplied missing parts for respirators. There were so many examples of this solidarity of European society, but it is the fact that EU institutions were invisible at the beginning of the crisis. So we can all ask an easy and simple question: why European institutions were invisible at the beginning of the pandemic? Why did you miss that opportunity to step in and coordinate major decisions of the EU member states? Well, we have to understand that the entire European integration process has been and giant leap into unknown, with two main objectives: consolidation of the peace and reconstruction of the European economic prosperity in the aftermath of the Second World War, and creating a region of peace and prosperity with shared economic growth promised by the EU founding fathers was to be realized by an economic program through and by the rule of law. The rule of law is one of the fundamental EU values essential for its functioning. Every action taken by the EU institutions has to be based on the treaties that had been approved by all EU member states. And the European Union has grown far beyond an organization of independent states that delegated part of its sovereignty to common institutions. Its complex architectural structure could be understood as being halfway between an association of sovereign states like the United Nations and politically integrated federation like the United States. But the EU is still based on the rule of law. And the European Union, under the principle of conferral, acts only within the limits of the competencies that member states have conferred upon the EU. Competencies not conferred upon the EU remain with member states. While the EU can act only within the limits of conferred competencies defined in the EU treaties, the member states have the right and obligation to deal with all other members. And that principle of conferral can be compared with the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, stating that the federal government has only those powers delegated to it by the Constitution, and all other powers are reserved to each state. And the European Union has three types of competencies. In a very limited number of areas, such as customs union, competition rules, or monetary policy for Eurozone members, it has exclusive competencies. The EU alone is able to pass laws. Then, in greater number of areas, such as agriculture, single market, employment, and social affairs, both EU and member states are able to legislate and adopt legally binding acts. And thirdly, in areas such as tourism, education, and culture, the EU has what treaties called supporting competencies. The EU can only support, promote, and coordinate, maybe also complement the actions of the member states, but it has no power to pass laws and may not interfere with member states' ability to pass laws. EU legal acts in the domain of supporting competencies may not require the harmonization of EU member states' law. So we have that principle of conferral that governs the EU competencies, but the use of those competencies is limited with two other principles: subsidiarity and proportionality. The EU doesn't take action under the principle of subsidiarity unless the EU action is more efficient than action taken at national, regional, or local level. And closely linked with this principle of subsidiarity is principle of proportionality, which requires that any action taken by the EU should not go beyond what is strictly necessary to achieve the aims of the EU treaties. And the public health doesn't fall within EU's exclusive competencies. The public health doesn't fall within EU's shared competencies. The public health is the responsibility of member states and the domain where the EU has only supporting competencies. What does it mean? It means that the EU can encourage cooperation among member states. You can promote research, you can complement national health policy. You can also give recommendations and advices, but everyone is free to ignore them. Not only that actions taken by the EU doesn't prevent member states from taking actions from their own, but the EU should also refrain from making any efforts towards harmonization of member states' laws related to public health. Once again, public health in Europe has always been an exclusive national responsibility, and the EU can indeed carry out actions to support, coordinate, and supplement member states' actions in the protection and improvement of human health. But once again, it should not take those actions unless they are more effective than actions taken at national, regional, and local level. Any action taken by the EU should not go beyond what is strictly necessary to achieve the aims of the EU treaties, and it should not lead to the harmonization of EU member states' laws. I know that I completely lost you here, and it's a fact that no one in Europe is really interested in this complex legal framework in which the EU institutions must operate. People in Europe, they have a little, if any, patience for explanations why the EU is unable to deliver rapid and efficient response to the pandemic. We have a survey conducted by the European Parliament in April 2020, which tells us that 3 out of 4 respondents say that they have heard, seen, or read about EU measures to respond to the pandemic. 1/3 of respondents knew what those measures are, and around half of those familiar with EU measures are dissatisfied with them. 6 out of 10 respondents are dissatisfied with the EU solidarity, and 7 out of 10 respondents would need more important role for EU institutions in this crisis. Therefore, there is no doubt that the beginning of the pandemic hasn't been the EU's finest hours, but at the same time, pandemic might be an argument to give the EU more powers in the domain of public health. And after this initial shock, it is the fact that the EU has advanced significantly in the fight against the pandemic. Over 500,000 EU citizens have been repatriated to their homes from around the world. Then coordination between EU member states increased, borders were open, then there was joint procurement of medical equipment, EU supported research on vaccines, diagnostics, and treatment. Then there was massive purchase on public and corporate bonds to save jobs all around Europe. And it is the fact that the EU's best instrument in this crisis is money. On 19th of March 2020, as I have already mentioned, the European Central Bank came with a huge and, for European standards, unparalleled bond buying plan of 750 billion euro. That would be 6% of EU GDP, with promise of necessary if needed. And on June the 4th, 2020, the European Central Bank decided to extend this program and added 600 billion euro to it, for a total of 1,350 billion euro. So we have to understand that there is a stark contrast between the EU competencies in the domain of public health and in the domain of socioeconomic impact of the COVID-19. The EU has all the necessary competence and all the necessary instruments to address the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic. And the best instrument the EU has is the money, and the most important response has been an agreement about the next multi-annual financial framework for 2021-2027, which is coupled with Next Generation EU. What is Next Generation EU? That is a temporary fund designed to repair socioeconomic effects of the pandemic, and a total of more than 2 trillion euros in current prices will help to rebuild greener, more digital, and more resilient post-COVID-19 EU. And the budget stimuluses both in the EU and the US has doubled those of 2007-2008 global financial crisis. And although this is not a race to the biggest stimulus ever, a comparison is inevitable. And the wisdom of US President Theodore Roosevelt that comparison is the thief of joy comes to mind in stark contrast between recovery plans in the US and in the EU. The measures taken by the European Central Bank, they are impressive, but they are dwarfed by those implemented by Federal Reserve System. The scale of EU programs is very impressive, but significantly smaller than the US stimulus packages. The United States is recovering much faster from the economic shock caused by the pandemic than EU member states. Why? First, because of the immense scale of the US fiscal stimulus, but there is another reason. Another reason lies with—
Sorry, Jasko.
Yes?
Sorry, the slides are not advancing. We still see the first slide.
You'll see the first slide?
Yeah, we still see the, is there anyone else seeing the slide advancing? Not really, right?
No, yeah, I'm not seeing the slides
You're
advancing.
not, okay, all right.
I think the presentation has not been actually started. So if you go up to where it says from beginning and click that, you can then advance with the arrow key. So
We
Yeah,
should be at the
so-
consolidated response after shaky start slide. I hope
slide
that
5, yeah, you're on.
Okay,
On the
so Jasko, maybe go to do slideshow. Excuse me. Can you do slideshow?
Okay, I'm
On the top.
doing it. Let's start once again. So I hope that you all see the first slide now.
Yes, we do
Oh.
see the first.
Now you see the second, and
No, we are not seeing it advancing.
that is what I don't understand, because I'm
You know,
moving all the slides, and now you see the first slide.
Maybe it's on the other screen. Maybe show the screen is different. I think Dr. Bacon is getting the IT to help a little, but if you can, yeah, you can continue to talk when like IT will be here soon.
Okay, IT will be here soon to save us.
Yes, to save us.
Hopefully.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I don't want to like waste
Okay,
the time.
thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Jasko.
I'm very sorry about this
No, thank
technical
you.
problem
Yeah,
with
go
the
ahead.
presentation that we have. Okay, so we have a problem with slides. They
Yeah.
don't move, they don't show, and I see that they are. We have a guy from the IT right now here. So hopefully the problem will be resolved.
No, they're nice slides.
They should see it now.
Here we go.
Okay, do you see them now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. Then problem is resolved. Thank you very much. So, as I have already mentioned, the United States is recovering much faster than European Union. Why? Because we have that immense scale of the US fiscal stimulus that has been a critical driver in ensuring that the world's largest economy quickly returns to pre-pandemic levels. But the other reason is that complicated EU institutional structure, lengthy decision-making processes, which delay the actual implementation of the stimulus package in Europe and contribute to its slower economic recovery. And it's a fact that European stimulus package may come at the short-term cost of the biggest and the strongest members of the Union, but each and every state will benefit from it in the longer term. History teaches us that in a deeply integrated Europe, one country's growth at the expense of its neighbors. It's not sustainable. Solidarity, desperately missing at the beginning of the pandemic, is essential for social cohesion in an open economy and for EU's pure existence. So the European Commission, the EU's executive body, got a mandate to issue up to 750 billion euro of debt on international capital markets on behalf of 27 EU member states, leading to a common debt. The joint issues of common debt bonds is not the first in the EU's history, but it has never been done on such a great scale. Those funds, they aim to support those countries and economies hardest hit by the pandemic, and the funds will be repaid from EU resources over the long period of time. And ladies and gentlemen, we all know that misfortune never comes alone, or when it rains, it pours. Post-COVID-19 EU is also post-Brexit EU 27. Hopefully you will be able to see the next slide. And this pandemic has provoked some of the steepest GDP declines ever, both in the United Kingdom and the EU. Long-term socioeconomic impacts such as change to supply chains or ways in which people and organizations work, they are hard to predict. But it is obvious that the main economic consequences, such as drastic impact on demand side due to lockdowns, they were temporary. Brexit, by contrast, brought less imminent but permanent changes in a way in which the UK trades with the EU. And both the COVID-19 and Brexit caused significant economic shocks that impact supply chains, often in different ways, meaning that they might well compound each other. And Brexit represents the most important constitutional shakeup the UK has ever known, or at least since it joined the European Economic Community, the EU's predecessor, on January 1st, 1973. But Brexit is also a long-term challenge for the EU. The EU must find a way to work constructively with its former member, which is both an important partner and prospective competitor. In finding the best possible relationship with the UK, pandemic didn't help this cause. And on 29th of January 2021, the European Union announced that it would introduce the export controls on vaccines produced in the Union. What happened? European Commission, the EU's executive body, was outraged by AstraZeneca's statement that it will deliver only 25% of the 100 million doses planned for the first quarter of this year. This Anglo-Swedish, I really emphasized Anglo-Swedish pharmaceutical company refused to divert vaccines from the UK plants, and EU officials, they raised suspicion that doses have been exported from the EU to the UK, and they feared that Northern Ireland could be used as a route to circumvent any export controls imposed by the EU. But the tricky part here is that any kind of hard border between the Republic of Ireland that remained in the Union and the Northern Ireland, that is UK's constituent part, would have devastating effects on the fragile peace of the island of Ireland. And all sides, London, Dublin, Brussels, they all agreed that this border must remain open, invisible, without any border checks and controls, without any border infrastructures. But arrangements for Northern Ireland, they had been the key stumbling block on the UK's exit from the Union. And solution was that there would be no checks and controls on the island of Ireland. And that is why the EU was concerned that Northern Ireland could be used as a backdoor for vaccines from the EU to the UK. And Northern Ireland Protocol, which is part of the withdrawal agreement, could be suspended, and checks and controls on the island of Ireland could be introduced, but only in the event of, quote, serious economic, societal, or environmental difficulties that are liable to persist. And that is a very high bar. And in a shocking announcement, European Commission said that those controls would be introduced. No doubt that this high bar, high standard hasn't been met in this case. There was no risk that vaccines would be moved from the EU to the UK through the Northern Ireland, and the EU's announcement of the export controls on the island of Ireland immediately attracted widespread criticism from the Irish Prime Minister, the UK government, all 5 parties in the Northern Ireland's government, and even the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of Anglican Church, had to react. The EU's decision was reversed within hours. The EU really failed to think through the consequences of its actions. The EU diplomats said that it was a mistake, but it was really a debacle for the EU. The EU undermined its own credentials as guardian of the peace in the region. But this vaccine dispute highlighted the growing political desperation over the global supply chains disruptions caused both by the pandemic and the Brexit. And another common denominator between Brexit and COVID-19 is that the European Commission took a leading role in both vaccine procurement and Brexit. The guiding principle was simple. The guiding principle was that unity negotiations, either with pharmaceutical companies or with the UK, would guarantee stronger negotiating position. And the European Commission negotiated withdrawal agreement and the EU-UK trade and cooperation agreement fully in line with its competencies. But European Commission has overstretched itself in coping with a health crisis for which it lacks experience, full responsibility, and democratic accountability. European Commission's plan for the joint procurement of vaccines and for sharing them equally among member states prevented vaccine nationalism from taking over. The European Union really integrated further by stealth as competencies shifted between EU member states and commissions. And critics, they say that vaccine rollout would be much faster without the EU's involvement. Its efforts of the European Commission to ensure that member states do not attempt to outbid each other is sometimes qualified as a sign of collectivism that has led to the lack of competitive drive among member states. And it's true, but any kind of competitive drive would spark a biting war in the EU single market that would inevitably result in tremendous frictions among member states. And the criticism of undeniably slow EU's vaccine rollout culminated on 23rd of February 2021, when German Daily Bild, that's the best-selling newspaper in Europe, wrote, Liebe Briten, we beneiden you. Dear Brits, we envy. A question why the UK was much faster at procuring and rolling out vaccines than the EU was legitimately raised. Brexit supporters, they claim that it was because the UK had left the Union. But the truth is that the UK could have done the same as EU member state. The UK benefits from close collaboration between academia and business and strong relations among scientific expertise, business awareness, and entrepreneurial proofs. Oxford University, in cooperation with already mentioned AstraZeneca, got a fast offer and quick, massive funding from the UK government to serve the public purpose by quickly providing the vaccine. And the EU should learn from British experience. Pandemics, they cannot be fought on national basis alone, but EU institutions, they need to move faster next time. Only solidarity combined with efficiency creates trust, which is in the short supply across the continent. And the entire history of the EU can be described as a series of policy and institutional innovations that took place as a response to crisis. Crisis always reveals the weaknesses of the existing structure. Crisis creates a special environment by putting strong pressure on the political system and help emergence of its new functions and institutions that are vital to move forward. This is particularly true about federal and quasi-federal structures because they tend to be younger and still evolving. Quote, Europe will be forged in crisis and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises, end of quote. This is what Jean Monnet, one of the founding fathers of the European integration, said. And actions taken by the EU institutions and European leaders during the pandemic, they will shape the future of Europe. But there is often repeated assumption that the EU always emerges stronger from the crisis. That assumption is powerful, that assumption is attractive, but it is not true. Only the time will tell if the EU could emerge stronger from this crisis. At the first glance, the pandemic has given a new momentum for further integration. Progress has been made. There is a new capacity to raise money on financial markets. There is a prospect of increased EU resources to fund an ambitious recovery plan. There are flexible budget norms and state aid rules that were unthinkable a few years ago. There are some discussions about EU public health policies, which might lead to institutional upgrade at some moment. The uncoordinated actions of the EU member states during the pandemic revealed that no government alone was able to get ahead of the spread of the virus. There is a growing recognition that no member state alone could handle the crisis on its own, and unfortunately, the prospect of new pandemic in coming years is far from unlikely. But will the COVID-19 present the key stepping stone in transforming the European Union from an association of sovereign states that delegated limited powers to common institutions into the United States of Europe? Probably not. Member states might agree to give Brussels more power in health matters. However, if they do so, they will do it in an unworkable way, giving with one hand while upholding or withholding with the other hand. Health has always been national responsibility in Europe. Health priorities and healthcare financing, they are deeply rooted in national cultures and the core values of the EU member state. European Union simply cannot make life and death decisions instead of its member states. And in 1959, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, then still a senator, famously said, when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and one represents the opportunity. Crises have driven progress through the history of European constructions. Many of them appear to pose existential dangers, so there was no shortage of extraordinary opportunities. But instead of making giant leaps, The European Union has always made small steps forward. European Union has survived by muddling through the crisis. And when we look back, times of crisis, they showed a similar pattern of action. There are always growing expectations regarding the EU's role, but they always result in gradual but very limited internal EU reforms. Sovereign debt crisis that began in 2019 threatened the survival of the Eurozone, and it ultimately produced greater coordination and supervision of member states' public finances, but major progress on economic and fiscal union and reform of fiscal rules hasn't been achieved. Then in 2015, EU struggled to cope with a sharp increase in the number of immigrants entering the Europe. Free movement of people and Schengen area, they were in the mortal danger. It led to stronger controls at external EU borders, but an effective common asylum policy still seems a long way off. In 2020, Brexit showed that a member state could withdraw from the Union, but the predicted domino effect did not materialize. No member state is likely to leave the Union anytime soon, and the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement has been achieved. So COVID-19, by forcing member states to agree upon the largest stimulus package ever financed in Europe, accelerated progress towards greener, more digital, and more resilient Europe. The taboo on issuing common debt to finance spending programs has been broken. Dogma of strict criteria of budget deficit and austerity policies as the only way forward is abandoned. In the health field, the EU has overstretched its limited prerogatives to coordinate the acquisition and distribution of vaccines. However, beyond that collective response of recovery fund backed by joint borrowing, procurement and rollout of vaccines, there is no sign of substantial institutional arrangements, and there is no sign of reforms to EU treaties. And ladies and gentlemen, this is not a surprise in the context of European integration. Many ambitious ventures were doomed to fail because states were not ready to prepare large parts of their sovereignty to the benefit of common institutions. And the EU solution for this issue was to create small areas of solidarity, to create small areas of cooperation among member states, and then, based on the success of those areas, to extend their scope. And the EU is still on the same track. The EU's response to the pandemic confirmed that European integration cannot stand still in the face of cross-border crises. Either the Union moves forward together, or each country goes its own way, which inevitably leads to a certain extent of disintegration. The COVID-19 leaves a void to be filled with an open and inclusive debate about the future of Europe. The European integration might reach the stage where further integration cannot happen by accident. Any step towards more united Europe must be a conscious choice of member states consistent with democratic wishes of their citizens. Rather than discussing if the pandemic should accelerate European integration, the true question to be asked is whether European citizens and their political leaders are willing to take necessary steps to make this happen. And I will finish in 2 minutes, and we will have some time for questions. I just want to emphasize that originally, in the 1950s, when the first small steps for initially only 6 involved countries, but giant leaps for the European integration were made, the political project of the joint European venture seemed clear. It was about Franco-German reconciliation and the return of economic prosperity to Western Europe. That political project was also legible when communism collapsed. It was about reconciliation of 2 different worlds and Europe, and democratization of former communist countries. The project in the 21st century still lacks a major mobilizing narrative, and we know that credible narratives are only born out of success. Refurbishing the union, which is proclamated goal of the next generation EU stimulus package, could revive the basic contract of European adventure, that of political solidarity and shared economic growth. If the spending is timely and well managed, the recovery fund will demonstrate the benefits of closure integration. And finally, the EU's recovery plan is very ambitious in both size and scope. If successfully implemented in lines with principles of solidarity and sustainability, and that's one big if, the union would be recognized as an important factor in promoting prosperity and cohesion for well-being of European citizens. It would also make the EU a major actor on global stage, capable of addressing key issues such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. In that sense, the COVID-19 crisis presents an opportunity that could offer a new mobilizing narrative the EU is desperately searching for. And if member states emerge stronger from the crisis, the idea of Europe will thrive. If not, it will continue to decline in the eyes of European citizens and the world. Thank you very much. And I think that we have a few minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Jasko. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Yes,
for
we'll
your
stop
attention.
sharing. You
Should
stay-
I move somewhere or
you stay there?
I stay here? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, Ron, you have a couple of questions. Do you want to unmute yourself and just ask Jasko?
Yeah, I just put them on there. I'm trying to run my dog outside.
Yeah, I think just I can read it if you can just comment. Jasko, there's a couple of questions from Dr. Bacon around Dr. Bacon. And the question he just posted is there is some awareness and concern of US citizens regarding our really burning national debt. What is the total debt of the EU and how is this being financed? Another question related to this is that the EU have something akin to the US national debt clock. Like we have that clock and every year the US Congress has to meet to decide, whether we close the Congress, shut down the government for a while, or when they discuss, or we continue. So is there something similar in European? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much for those great questions. And that is one huge difference between the EU and the United States of America. The EU budget is mostly an investment budget. It never runs deficit, it never builds up debt. The EU budget can spend only what it gets from member states. And now there is a huge paradigm shift because European Commission got mandate to issue up to 750 billion euros of debt on financial markets, and it will do it during the period of 7 years, and that debt should be financed from EU resources, and EU itself got new resources to fund that debt. So at this moment, EU's debt is zero, which is a huge difference between the EU and the United States of America.
Correct. Huge.
But if I can just add one thing, it is also important to understand that EU's budget is relatively small compared to national budgets. National budgets, they can go up to 50% of gross national income. The EU budget doesn't exceed 2% of gross national income. And that is why the EU stimulus is much smaller than US fiscal stimulus.
Thank you so much. Maybe just give you, I will read this question very quick. It's earlier from Ron as well. didn't EU law require agreement before making decisions against the expressed wishes of members? Years before the pandemic, when the EU voted to proceed with mandated immigration quotas against the expressed wishes, maybe 3 members from EU, Hungary being the most vocal, didn't this set up a lack of a cooperation during the pandemic?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So all EU decisions, they are based on EU treaties. Those treaties had been negotiated and approved by all EU member states. And when we speak about the EU decision-making processes, EU decision-making processes are quite complicated. For majority of decisions, qualified majority is required. Qualified majority is 55% of member states representing at least 65% of European population. For some decisions, reinforced qualified majority is required. 72% of EU member states representing at least 65% of European population. And for some decisions, unanimity is required. Those decisions regarding immigration policy, they required reinforced majority. Reinforced majority was achieved. Only 2 countries were against it, but at the end of the day, that decision wasn't implemented, and the EU still doesn't have a common asylum policy.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I think we got 1 minute. Any final comment, Dr. Bacon, Melody Bacon? Dr. Melody Bacon, do you have any last comment or before we wrap up?
No, I move, I don't move.
Change. I know, I have musical chairs here.
But I
Yes.
remain here. I didn't disappear.
We can hear you. Yes, we can see both of you.
Good, good. Yes, so I think this is an important kind of insight because particularly your comments at the beginning of the differences with culture and especially as related to space. And I think that as Americans, you know, who've been born and raised in this country or have, you know, been raised anyway, I think we forget that that a lot of the way people live, even in other Western countries, is quite different, and that shapes the culture and assumptions that people make. So I think that's very important because one of the reasons we want to give these talks is to help our community understand the mindset and the assumptions of people, the perspectives of other people. So I think that was, you know, really telling, particularly since we tend to see Western countries as all in one kind of category. And when in fact, you know, we have quite different basic assumptions about the way the world works, given the structure of our culture. And part of that has to do, as you noted, with the vastness of our country. So I think that was particularly important.
Thank you so much. I think the time is up. Thank you very much, Jessica. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And hopefully if you are in Anaheim area, welcome you to join us for the small welcome gathering at 4 o'clock on Anaheim campus. Otherwise, I will see you for the rest of the week. We have plenty on campus activities and webinars as well. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I will see some of you later. And thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.